Hello again, this is Randy in the shop. Today I'm working on another engine project. It's a small block Chevy, starting out with a factory 400 block, and we're putting a 350 crank in it. The cylinder bore is 40 over, so it makes it 380 cubic inches. It's going to be 12-to-1 compression, running on E85 with a hydraulic roller cam, and it has raised runner 23-degree intake cylinder heads with a raised runner intake manifold that I have to port, and a 950 E85 carburetor set up with a hydraulic roller cam. I'll bring you over to the block. I'll show you a little bit about that, and I'll be right back. Okay, we're over at the block now. I installed the center 3 main caps and drilled the block for the splayed bolts, and then took it to the machine shop, and they line honed it, or line bored it, and the cylinders have already been bored 40 over. And how you do this with a putting a 350 crank in a 400 block is you actually have a spacer right here. There's a spacer bearing that you put in first, and then you put your standard 350 main bearing in, and that spaces it down because the mains on a 350 crank are smaller than a standard 400 block. Done it bunches of times, no issues with it as long as you have the right amount of crush on the bearing to hold it in place. It's a pretty good deal that way. Flip this over here and we can see the bore. There's the cylinders all bored and honed. What I need to do next is put the crank and a connecting rod and a piston in the 4 corners and check the deck height and get the block decked. Gonna shoot for 0 deck because it's going to be about 12-to-1 compression. So I'll bring it over to the bench and I'll show you how I'm doing the connecting rods. Be right back. These are the connecting rods here. They're an Eagle H-beam. They're 6-inch long, and they have the L19 rod bolts in it. And what I'm doing now is I'm checking the bearing clearances of the bearings, miking the crank pin. I got the crank set up in the lathe over here. It's a Cola crank, and it's standard on the mains and the rods. And I measured the rod journal. The rod journal comes up at 2-inch 0.99. So then what I do is I set the bore gauge up right here, this bore gauge. I set the bore gauge up for the size of the pin, and then I run that through the connecting rod like so. Set that in there, and then read the dial indicator on the bore gauge, and that right there is showing 1.5 thousandths clearance. What I have in this connecting rod here is I have a 1 under bearing. And this connecting rod here has a standard bearing in it. I'll put the bore gauge in this one. There we go. I measure the clearance here, and I have 2 and a couple tenths. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a standard bearing in all the connecting rods. What you can do if your clearance is a little bit off, you can like take either a 1 under or 1 over bearing and only put half of it in, put it on the bottom side, and that will either increase your clearance or decrease your clearance the amount that you want. I generally shoot for 1/1000th clearance per inch of journal diameter. So we got just over a 2-inch 2-inch journal that the rod is fitting on, and I have like 2.2 thousandths clearance on this connecting rod. So here's the rest of the rods here. I already went and checked the big end with the specs in the bearing book, and they're all within a couple tenths of right where they should be. About in the middle of the specification, they specify 2.247 to 2.2252. So it's 2.2247 to 2.2252, and I set my micrometer at 2.225. So it's right in about in the middle of the spec, and checked them all, and they were, all the rods were within a couple of tenths. So that's what I'm working on here now. I'm going to do a couple more here, and I'll bring it back when I have them set up. Okay, I got one more rod set up here. Slide the board gauge in, and we'll check it. And I have 2 thousandths, maybe a tenth. I don't know if you can see that or not. You should be able to. So on this particular deal, with the size of the big end of the connecting rod, with the size of this end here, and the diameter of the crank pin, because the crank is at the small end of the spec, you can get by using a standard bearing. Otherwise, sometimes you have to mismatch. And if this connecting rod end here was on the small end of the spec, sometimes what you can do is just hone it a little bit and open that up, and that'll give you the clearance that you need. But I don't really like to do that, honing this to get my clearance. I'll change bearings to get the clearance that I want. Just my preference. So I'll be right back. I'll show you something else here too a second here. I got the gauge for the sun and rod hone set to the specification for this big end of the connecting rod here. And what you can do is set this on here and turn it slightly, and it will tell you right there it's reading a tenth under the micrometer that I set it with. This is showing a tenth under. A couple of them are a tenth bigger. So but you just rotate that from side to side there, and that tells you how round the big end is. Flip it around and measure it again here, and you can see that connecting rod, the big end of the connecting rod, is nice and round. That's the way it's supposed to be. If they're not round, then you have to remachine this big end here. Because a lot of times what happens when when the connecting rod gets worn, it will actually pinch at the part line and get big here. So you don't want it pinching here. So you machine the cap down, or connecting rod in the cap, and then you bolt it back together and you hone it back round again. The connecting rod's got to be round. All right, I'm back over at the bench again from the line hone. Hope this makes a little bit of sense. It's just part of the process of building a motor. Yeah, you don't have to check it, but if everything, you expect it to live and everything to stay together, this is the process that you go through. So just one of them things. That's why it's a tedious process doing a motor. So anyway, when I get the crank in the block and I get ready to check piston to deck height, I'll bring you back and show you what that's about, how you go about checking it, and have a great day. We'll talk to you later. Bye.